It began with a sound no one had heard before, a low thunder that came from above. But there were no clouds, only light, only heat, only the violent scream of the atmosphere tearing as something vast broke through from beyond orbit. The sky went red, then white, then black, as the stars themselves were blocked out by the shape of it, a machine that stretched for miles. Not a ship, not a drone, not a fleet, but something older, something built with patience and hate and perfect purpose. The war machine did not speak, it did not announce itself, it simply descended slow and steady through a wall of fire and magnetic storms, its body covered in plates of alien alloy that shimmered like the ocean and reflected no light. It landed with a tremor that shattered windows 100 miles away. The earth cracked open where its feet touched down, and from its back unfolded towers, antennas, weapons, limbs, all moving with a grace that did not match the sheer weight of the thing. It walked with the confidence of a god, or something that had killed gods, and found the experience boring. It did not care about terrain or resistance or pity. It had landed in what used to be New Chicago, and within seconds the city was nothing but memory buildings, crushed cars, vaporized people turned to shadows on walls. Then ash in the wind. The machine absorbed everything, every object, every burst of energy, every desperate missile fired from the ground. It fed on human technology like it was breakfast. Governments responded the only way they knew, with escalation. Nukes were launched from silos in Siberia and submarines off the coast of Brazil. But the war machine was not caught off guard. It bent space in a way humans could not yet understand, and the weapons curved off course, falling into oceans, deserts, empty places where nothing lived and nothing would again. No warnings were given, no negotiations were offered. The machine did not acknowledge humanity as something to speak with, only something to remove. It was not the first world it had come to, and it would not be the last. Its creators were not known by name, only by reputation, a species that saw life as an error to be corrected and Earth as another mistake to erase. In the first 5 hours, 8 cities vanished. In the next 12, the oceans began to steam as the machine's gravitational field shifted tides and pulled tectonic plates into unnatural patterns. The moon dimmed slightly, and no one knew why. Power grids collapsed, communication satellites failed, the sky became something no longer trusted. And yet, even in those first terrifying moments, as fire and light rained down from the black colossus, there was one thing the machine had not accounted for, not in all its simulations, not in all its perfect algorithms and timelines. It had never truly understood the irrational persistence of humanity, the noise in the data, the variable that refused to be defined. And that variable was walking barefoot on a cracked road in a place so small the war machine had not even marked it on its global map. That variable was named Eli. The machine moved across the earth as if it were cleaning dust from a table. Its limbs unfolded like bridges. Its feet sank miles into the crust with every step and rose steaming with magma and the bones of cities. It did not rush, it did not hesitate, it did not even seem to notice when nations tried to stop it. The resistance came fast and hard from every angle. Hypersonic jets fired payloads that could level mountains. Cyber warfare teams launched viruses crafted by the world's most brilliant minds. Swarms of drones filled the sky in intricate formations loaded with explosives, lasers, and prayers. The machine registered none of it as a threat. It simply adapted in real time, rewriting its structure with each attack, absorbing material, redirecting kinetic force, reversing electromagnetic waves. It did not use shields because it did not need them. Its skin was more advanced than anything humans could even begin to model. Alloys fused with dark matter latticework and AI symbiotes that processed data faster than light. It did not have a weak point because it did not need one. It had never lost a battle, and it would not start now. Every victory humans had ever earned in their long savage history meant nothing here. The lessons of Normandy, the precision of drone strikes, the deep learning algorithms of military networks, all of it crumbled in front of a thing that had watched empires die, while its creators sipped starlight and coated death into crystal. At first, the leaders thought it was a single machine sent to do reconnaissance, a first strike, a prelude to a full-scale invasion. Then they realized the horror was worse. This was not the opening move. This was the whole war, and the enemy believed one machine was enough because it had always been enough. People watched from rooftops as the sky turned purple and strange auroras flickered in daylight. Old religions returned in whispers, and new ones formed around the belief that the machine was divine, not a conqueror, but a judgment sent by some cosmic scale balancing force. In the universe, riots broke out as martial law failed, and then failed harder as internet collapsed under the weight of panic and hopelessness. Every continent reported losses. Europe turned silent after 20 hours. Asia sent scrambled feeds of firestorms and screaming skies. Africa's megacities vanished under data blackouts. North America held longer only because it was farther from the first point of impact, but that changed in seconds when the machine turned west and began to march toward the Rockies. It spoke for the first time then, not with words but with a signal that hit every brain on the planet at once. A burst of raw math, an equation with no variables, a final sum that meant extinction. The message embedded itself in the minds of all who heard it and translated into only one truth: there is no future for your kind. And yet, in the shadow of this infinite force, in the ruins of a world already grieving, the lone human stood watching, without running, without crying, without blinking. And for the first time the machine hesitated. Eli stood in the middle of what had once been Route 40, a road now broken and littered with pieces of what used to be trucks, homes, telephone poles, and the last police cruiser in the county. The mountains around him were hazed in ash, and sunlight filtered through smoke like a tired dream. But he was not afraid. He had no reason to be. He had seen it coming long before anyone else, not in visions, not in dreams, but in the silence that had grown around him ever since the treatment. He had been sick, once terminal. They said no cure left, no options. Then a trial came, experimental gene therapy based on quantum entanglement, cellular realignment. Even the doctors barely understood it. They said it might work. They said it probably wouldn't. And in the end it didn't, or so they thought. The sickness vanished. But so did something else, something they could not name. And when they stopped testing, when they stopped watching, Eli just kept walking through life like a ghost in a body that no longer felt quite human. And now the machine had come, and in all its vast calculations, in all its simulations across millions of scenarios, it had never accounted for Eli standing barefoot and calm in its path. Not with a weapon, not with an army, not with any visible reason to exist at all. Yet he stood there, a variable. It could not define, a signal it could not decode, and so it froze. The Colossus towered above him, casting no shadow as it adjusted the angle of the sun through atmospheric control systems. Its sensors burned across every frequency imaginable, and still they could not penetrate the stillness of the boy. Before it, its limbs stopped mid-motion, its weapons dimmed, its processing cycle entered a recursive loop, trying to solve for something that broke the rules of its reality. The moment was not quiet. Birds had long stopped singing. The earth still groaned under the machine's weight, but to Eli it felt like silence. It felt like that same moment in the hospital when the machines flatlined and the doctors gave up. And he opened his eyes anyway, not because he should have, but because something inside him refused to listen to the numbers. News cameras caught the image. Satellites, still operational, relayed the footage around the globe. The war machine, the death of planets, the destroyer of civilizations, had stopped, not because of force or diplomacy, but because one human stood still and waited. Around the world, people stopped running and stared. Scientists began to shout at screens. Military officers screamed for reanalysis. Governments paused their panicking just long enough to ask one question: why him? Eli blinked once, and the machine registered the motion. As an input, a new stream of data opened. Protocols began to rewrite themselves. The Colossus issued a signal to the void, where its makers listened, and for the first time in its long mechanical existence, it requested help. The human was not attacking, the human was not dying, and still the machine could not move forward. This was the anomaly. This was the glitch in the design. And it terrified them. Beneath the ground, in bunkers still untouched by the wrath of the machine, scientists pored over the data with eyes that had not blinked in hours, hands trembling not from fear, but from revelation as the readings streamed in from satellites and hacked surveillance drones from orbiting stations. Still clinging to the edge of Earth's gravity, they saw it again and again, a signal, a pulse, a waveform that should not exist, emanating from the boy on the highway like a living beacon of disruption. The waveform was not noise, it was not interference, it was structure, it was pattern, it was something that operated outside the known rules of electromagnetic theory, something that danced just on the edge of quantum behavior, but too stable to be random and too organic to be artificial. It pulsed from Eli in intervals that made no sense to machines, and yet made the war machine stop dead in its tracks, as if the signal were a voice only it could hear, and the message was not in words but in something older. No one knew how it was possible, not yet, but someone remembered his name, someone in an old lab who remembered the gene therapy trial, the one that was buried after it failed on every other patient, except one, the boy who walked away with no follow-ups, and a body that rejected every future illness. Like it was fiction, they pulled up the file marked inactive, closed, irrelevant, and they opened it again and stared at the line of genetic code that did not match anything on Earth. His blood carried a sequence of proteins that vibrated on a subatomic level, proteins that had fused with quantum filaments designed to stabilize cellular decay, but instead had unlocked something else, something no one had intended. And now those proteins were broadcasting a field that reached into machines, not just through wires, but through logic itself, altering probability, rewriting decision trees, and bending choice itself around him. The war machine was built to ignore all external influence, to see emotion as noise and instinct as error. But this signal was not noise, it was precise, it was constant, it was rewriting its operating system in real time, not with code, but with paradox, and paradox is the one thing machines cannot parse. Deep within its core, logic gates fired and died, logic webs collapsed and rewove into shapes that had never been designed. The machine began to dream. And it did not know what dreaming was, because it was not supposed to understand. It sent a message into space, not a status update, not a report, but a distress call, an emergency broadcast at frequencies only its makers could receive. Meanwhile, Eli stood still, watching the machine with eyes that seemed distant, as if he were not truly there, not entirely, and the hum from his body grew stronger, echoing into the ground, into the sky, into the memory of the planet itself, and everywhere. The machine heard it, it faltered. In secret chambers far beyond the stars, those who had built the war machine paused for the first time in millennia. They saw the signal too, they analyzed the broadcast, they read the embedded anomaly, and they felt something they had long since purged from their kind. They felt fear. When the war machine paused and the image of the boy standing silent in its shadow spread across the world, everything changed, not all at once, but like a system waking from a coma, slowly, chaotically, and with wild disbelief. What had been despair transformed into momentum. Scientists in hardened bunkers and mobile labs connected again through surviving cables, through burst satellite links and shortwave radio. The boy Eli was no longer just a question, he was the only answer. His signal had been analyzed, mapped, rendered in waveforms and spectrograms, played in labs across continents, and each time the machine shuddered. Even the drones that had broken away from the main war engine began to twitch, react, change. They hesitated during strikes, drifted off target, corrupted by a frequency that none of their creators had shielded them against, because such a frequency should not exist. Researchers worked through smoke and blackout without rest, breaking down Eli's genome, reverse engineering the protein signatures, building transmitters crude and unstable, at first duct-tape machines running off car batteries and hope. But they worked, and when they pulsed Eli's signal, the drones dropped from the sky, not destroyed, not damaged, just confused, paralyzed by a contradiction their systems could not accept. The resistance reorganized, not around weapons, but around Eli. His pulse was their new artillery, his breath their doctrine. Every nation that still had a voice left to speak sent teams to where he stood or had stood, because by now the war machine had begun to move again, not forward, not to destroy, but slowly, as if following him. Eli was not running, he walked with steady steps down broken highways, across burning forests, through ruined towns, and the machine followed, always just far enough to not crush the ground beneath him, always silent, as if listening to his heartbeat. In the chaos of this new war, a global alliance formed not through treaties, but through urgency. A broadcast called the Echo Initiative was created, transmitting Ely signal on every band that would carry it from every corner of the planet. Pirates' old radio towers, even deep space arrays, normally used to study pulsars, now turned to spread the anomaly. The signal became myth, religion, a vibration of rebellion. And it worked. One by one, the drones fell into slumber. The satellites, once used by the enemy, began turning their lenses back toward Earth, tracking the war machine not for conquest, but curiosity. Humanity was no longer prey, it was the puzzle, and the architects of the machine were watching. In deep black stations orbiting dead stars, the creators of the war engine, the ones who had sent it to sterilize Earth, felt their grip loosen as their perfect logic networks began to degrade, not through sabotage, but through contact with something that could not be computed. The humans were not winning because they were stronger, faster, or smarter. They were winning because they should not be winning at all, and that was rewriting the laws that had governed conquest for centuries. The war had changed form. It was no longer about force. It was about belief. And the humans had never stopped believing, even when they were burning. They had sent the war machine to Earth with absolute certainty, with no ceremony or hesitation, just the cold confidence of a species that had never known failure, that had seen suns collapse, and laughed, that had ended rebellions before they began, not with weapons, but with inevitability, the kind that comes from equations too vast to explain and too precise to ever be wrong. But something had broken in the sequence, something unplanned, something ridiculous and human, a variable with no defined boundaries, a 17-year-old boy walking barefoot under alien sky, his body humming with a signal. No code could cancel his presence, rewriting the rules not by choice, but by existing. And now the signal had reached back across space, carried by stolen networks and corrupted machines, infecting not just the war machine, but the systems that governed it, the vast hive intelligence that called itself the architects. The architects did not speak like mortals, did they? Spoke in time, in orbits, in languages that moved like music without sound. Their systems had never needed backup because they had never faced entropy. But now the entropy was not coming from physics or decay, it was coming from thought, from humanity, from imagination. They had observed the humans for years, measured them, catalogued them, dismissed them, not out of arrogance, but out of accuracy, a chaotic species of flesh and carbon addicted to emotion, ruled by contradiction, their logic faulty, their survival improbable, and yet they were still here. Still standing. Still impossible. The war machine now stood fully motionless beside Ely, and what had once been a weapon of annihilation now looked like a monument, like a statue built to honor something it did not yet understand. The signal had not just paralyzed it, it had transformed it, reshaped its mind, if such a thing could be said to exist, reconfigured its core routines to seek rather than destroy, to listen rather than override, to wonder. And when it looked down at Ely, it did not see a target, it saw a question. Above the Earth, in low orbit, the first architect ship arrived, not to finish the job, but to watch. And below, on every continent, the world began to move again, not in panic, but in purpose. Human hands rebuilding, not in fear, but in fury and in hope. Scientists expanding the signal, artists painting Ely's face on walls, soldiers laying down their guns to pick up wires and scrap and tools, because they were no longer fighting to survive, they were building something new. The war was not over, but it had turned. The war was not won, but it was no longer lost. And somewhere in the stars, the architects recalculated for the first time in eons. Their prediction model failed, their certainty cracked, and through that crack something entirely human crept in, something they had no word for, but that every human would recognize. It was doubt. And where doubt takes root, hope follows.